Hello everyone! In this week's video, I'm testing out TikTok art hacks. Recently, I've been doing TikTok art challenges, but many of you have been wanting to see me do TikTok art hacks again. I had a lot of fun the last time I tested out art hacks, and so I'm happy to do it again. We have a variety of hacks to try. Some are for digital art, some are for traditional art, webcomics, animation, and so on. So let's jump in. So I thought this one was really cool. It's showing how to easily animate this really neat shiny effect onto your art in Clip Studio Paint. Something really awesome I learned from this is that Clip Studio Paint has keyframes. I didn't know Clip Studio Paint had this, and it was something I wanted, but it was there this whole time. Or it was added in one of the recent updates. I'm not sure how long it's had keyframes for. So here's my art that we are subjecting to this experiment. I start by making a new layer above it. Then I make two diagonal lines for the highlights. I set this layer to add glow and clip it to my art so it only displays on the art. Now for the animation. I go up to this window and select timeline. Then I create a new timeline by clicking a bunch of buttons and stuff. I could describe it, but you see what's happening on screen. Anyways, now that I have the timeline, I can animate using the keyframes. Also, if you don't know what keyframes are, basically you can place an object here, then place it over here, and the program will do the in-between stuff. This makes animating stuff like these shinies super easy, and I wish I would have known about it earlier. Anyways, first I need to enable the keyframes by going to these menus. I make sure to have my highlight layer selected when doing this. Now that I have keyframes turned on for this layer, I can press this button to place keyframes on the timeline. I place one at the start with the highlights off the left side of the canvas. Then I place one a little past the middle point and place the highlights in the middle. I just did this because that's what the TikTok did. But then I placed a third keyframe with the highlights off the canvas on the right side. And ta-da! We just animated some fancy highlights. I thought it might be funny to have the highlights go across some glasses, so I quickly drew some sunglasses and clipped the highlights to the glasses. I think this hack is really neat, and it taught me that keyframes in Clip Studio Paint are a thing, so that's very beneficial. So this next hack is totally down my alley. I love to add light rays to my art. I just love the way they look, and while it turns out IBIS Paint has a really easy way to add light rays. You just draw some little blobs where you want the rays of light to come from. Then we go to the filter area, go to the style section, and select God Rays. And when I selected it, I was a bit let down. It wasn't doing anything and I was a bit confused. But then I figured out you need to drag this little sun around and it will let you decide how the light rays will display. You can play around with these sliders to change the brightness and stuff. This is a really fun way to play around with light rays and see what you like. I especially think this is cool because I love light rays. This hack is a neat idea, and it's to use a colorless marker blender to blend your color pencils. This is something I've kind of done, like when I sketch with color pencil and then use a marker on top of them, it does make the pencil kind of dissolve. But I've never tried using a colorless blender and putting it on top of color pencil coloring. I could have just done some swatches to try this out, but I thought it'd be more fun to do an actual sketch and test this out like I was drawing in my sketchbook. That way I could see if it's something I actually want to use. So for this, I'm just drawing a simple sketch of a girl character. I don't know, I didn't put too much time into this. I just wanted to draw something simple and easy to give this hack a try. But I did still enjoy working on this, even if it is really simple. I haven't really worked with color pencils recently. My current sketchbook is a watercolor sketchbook, so I've been using watercolors a lot. It was a fun change of pace to use color pencils. When cleaning up the sketch, I used a dark purple for areas I felt were more in shadow, and then a lighter magenta kind of color for the line art that was in lighter areas. I've been having a lot of fun doing stuff like this where you use different colors for line art. I think it makes the coloring and lighting feel a little bit more dynamic. Also, I am using Prismacolor color pencils, and I did use an Arteza erasable color pencil for my rough sketch. They are pigment based like many color pencils. I do also have oil based color pencils, but since they are oil based, I figured they wouldn't break down as well with the Copic marker. I'm thinking this technique will work a bit like applying paint thinner to color pencil, If you don't know, colored pencil pigment breaks down if you apply paint thinner on it. It makes the pencil lay down smoother, kind of gets rid of the texture, and also blends the colors. So yeah, I'm assuming the marker ink will do something similar to this. I didn't fully color the picture because I had a limited amount of colored pencils next to me, and I was feeling too lazy to go grab all my color pencils. But I did add a bit of shading with a light pink, and also the purple and magenta. I actually really like working with limited colors. I know many people treat using limited colors as a challenge when doing art, but I often find it easier. It's always so hard for me to decide when I have access to all the colors, so I often limit myself to just a handful, so I don't get overwhelmed by all the options. Okay, now it's time to see what happens when I apply the colorless blender. And so I have to say I am a fan of this. It's not super mind-blowing, but it does give the pencil a much softer look and breaks down the pigment to help them blend together. Also, I am using an Arteza colorless blender because apparently my Copic one is totally dry. I was very happy when I found this one. I got scared I wouldn't be able to test this out. I do think that maybe this effect would have been even more noticeable if I had applied more pigment to the paper. For the most part, I kept the colors pretty light and didn't go crazy with applying the pigment. But you will see that in the darker areas like the under hair and for the eyes, the colorless blender has even more of an effect since there is more pigment to break down and push around. It is interesting that it makes the purple a bit more pinky. So you may want to test how the blender affects the colors beforehand. Thankfully it wasn't a very big deal in this case that the color slightly changed. It is a little sad that this does make the color blend through to the other side of the paper where the darker purple areas are. It's like the pigment gets pushed through to the other side and I can slightly see it on the other side of the paper. So that is a little bit of a downside. But overall I quite like this. I really like the look of it and it does soften the texture. I give it 2 thumbs up. Would recommend giving it a try. Do you hate drawing water? Well, this Ibis paint filter is for you. I quickly drew a leaf to put the water on because we're going to make some water droplets on it. On a new layer above the leaf, I drew a bunch of blobby shapes. Then I just go to the filter area and find the water drop rounded filter in the style section, and boom, we have water. Honestly, this is kind of magical. You can even play around with the sliders to change the appearance of the droplets. I didn't really know about all these neat filters. I kind of want to get Ibis Paint on my PC so I can use them more. This next batch of hacks are related to webcomics and webtoons. These are kind of more like tips, but I found them when searching for hacks. So I thought I would include them because they can be very helpful. Something that is very handy is the subview window. I didn't know about it for years, but once I did find out about it, I have used it all the time. As you can see, I have Pokemon references in here from my last video. It's super handy because you can import pictures into it. So like if you want a reference of your character to look at as you're drawing, you can have it easily available. You can even import multiple pictures into the subview window and look at them by pressing these arrows. You can drag it wherever you want, and if you have this button pressed, when you scroll over the subview, it will automatically change to the eyedropper tool. So you can easily select colors, and when you go back to your work area, you have your brush again. It makes selecting colors way faster. Speaking of character colors, something I use all the time is my custom color palette. Here I have all of the colors for my characters from my webcomic. You can create your own palette by clicking here and clicking create new set. Then to add colors to the palette, you just select a color, right click on the square and click replace color. And now you can forever easily select that color. This tip is super helpful if you're making a webtoon. So when I make my webtoon chapters, I have a really long canvas like this. Something that is a bit tricky at times is I don't really know what exactly the readers are seeing on their screen when I upload the chapter to Webtoon. Well, it turns out that Clip Studio Paint has a feature that lets you see what will appear on screen for your readers when the chapter is posted. This is so helpful and will help me have a better idea of what my readers are seeing. Oh, also, I guess there is the companion app, but I haven't tried that yet. Do you like to draw digitally, but you also like the look of traditional art? Well, this is for you. I saw this done in Ibis Paint X, but it probably worked for many programs. To start, I'm going to bring in a texture from the material library. I select drawing paper 1 and apply it to the canvas. Then I set this texture layer to overlay. Now any layer that I make under this layer will have the texture applied to it. And it has a really neat traditional art feel to it. I actually tried doing this in Clip Paint and I couldn't recreate it at first, but that's because textures in Clip Paint have transparent areas. So to make this work, I needed to make a white layer behind the texture and merge them together. And now I can do it in Clip Paint as well. So for this next hack, we're going to be working in my sketchbook. And it is to use alcohol markers on top of acrylic paint. This is something I would never think to try, but after seeing it, I really wanted to try it for myself. It's been a really long time since I've used acrylic paint, like I think a couple of years, and I haven't used it very many times. So because I'm not super confident with them, I wanted to paint something kind of simple, and also because I wasn't totally sure if this hack would work, so I wanted to paint something that wouldn't be too sad if it was ruined. And like I've said in the past, when I think simple, I think of Kirby. And there's a new Kirby game and it looks so cute. Kirby just looks so adorable in all the promotional stuff. So I wanted to draw something inspired by the game. So yeah, Kirby's super simple. So I had this sketch done in like 4 minutes. But now it's time for the paint. Oh, also I'm using Arteza acrylic paint for this. It dries with a slightly glossy finish and is pretty thick. It's the only acrylic paint I have, so I was kind of nervous and hoping it would work with the markers because I don't have any other acrylic paint to try with it. So yeah, now I'm just filling in my sketch with the colors. The trickiest part about acrylic paint for me is that it's very easy to cover your sketch and just get rid of it completely. This always makes things a bit tricky for me because then you have to kind of paint around areas, or if you accidentally cover them up, you have to kind of re-figure out how you placed things. Like I was trying to paint around the eyes, but I ended up covering them a bit, and in the end I feel like they ended up being a little bit wonky. I kept debating if I should add more water to my paints. Like I said, these are on the thicker side, and because of that they kept holding their form and texture when I was painting with them, and they aren't laying out super smoothly. But because the whole point of the hack is that you can have a painty texture for the base and then shade it with markers, I figured it was okay to keep the texture of the paint. The trickiest part was definitely the eyes, and Kirby looks a bit horrifying at the moment. The brushes I was using were a bit big and I was having a hard time making the smooth oval shape. I was also struggling with the highlights. Like I said, I haven't used acrylic paint in a long time, and I haven't used them very many times, so please bear with me. To clean some areas up, I decided to use some paint pens because they are much easier to be accurate with. Although something did happen. I needed more paint in the nib of my blue paint marker, so I pushed the pen up and down off screen to make more paint go into the nib, but then there was so much that it dripped onto Kirby. Thankfully I am using paint and I can paint over it, but it was a bit of a hiccup in the process. Since I have the base colors in place, I decided I would finally try using the markers to add shading. And I do want to say that before I did this, I did use my heat gun for a few minutes on the paint to make sure that it was good and dry. It was interesting using the Copic on top of the paint, or the alcohol-based marker. I'm using Copics, but you can use any alcohol-based marker. The paint was very smooth, so the marker kind of just glides on it. Plus the ink can't really soak into the paint, so it kind of just sits on top of it. But it is kind of interesting how much the Copic looks like paint if you layer it on top of paint. It looks like I mixed up different paint colors and applied them like the rest of my paint, but I'm actually using markers, and it's much easier than mixing up a bunch of colors, and is much easier to control. Oh, also, here I'm cleaning up the eyes more with my paint pens. They definitely started to look much better once I did this, thankfully. But yeah, like I was saying, the markers are much easier to control, so for like cleaning up the mouth, it was super easy because I just used a dark red. Compared to with the paint, it's a little bit trickier to be super clean, at least for me since I'm not super experienced. So this is a really neat trick. However, I do feel like there are maybe some cons. I don't really know if this one is a con, but because you are using the colors on top of paint, it can be hard to know how the color will look. You don't really know until you try. I kept trying my best to guess how the color would look when layered on top of the different colors of paint, but sometimes the result would be very different. Secondly, the markers do dissolve the paint a bit and you end up getting paint on the nibs of your markers. I am a bit worried about the nibs and if this is okay for them. Once I was finished with the painting, I cleaned my nibs by rubbing them on paper, but one of them that I used a lot on the paint still look a bit different than they did before. So yeah. Thirdly, I don't know about the longevity of this. Markers aren't archivable, so I'm questioning what the reaction between the paint and the markers will be in the long run. A lot of times I don't really care about archivability, but I do know there are many people that do. Lastly, I do think this looks very neat and does look very painty. But if I was painting a character, I don't know if I would like this kind of texture. It does have a little bit of a streaky look. If you're going for more of a painty look, this definitely works for that. But yeah, if I was painting, say, a character and I wanted things to be a bit more smooth, I don't know if I would like it. But overall, this was super fun and I enjoyed it. I liked using all the different colors and layering them on the paint. It was a very fun and new experience. It allowed a person like me who isn't super skilled with acrylic paints to make something that has more color variety and control. So if you think this looks neat, I recommend giving it a try. But maybe use the chisel nib of your markers. These next 2 tips are to help make your digital drawing experience more comfortable. Are you ever drawing and enjoying your time, but after a while your eyes start to feel tired or maybe kind of hurt? Something I often do to help with eye strain is change the color of my canvas. If you draw on a bright white, this is, well, very bright for your eyes. So changing the paper color to something more muted can be helpful. A lot of times I change the canvas color to something that goes along with what I'm drawing. Like if I'm drawing something forest related, I'll change it to a muted green. Also, in many programs you can change the workspace. Like Clip Studio Paint has a dark and light theme. I personally prefer the light theme just because it's what I've used for the last 10 years. But I do have it set to a darker shade. It can get really, really light, but to make it easier on my eyes, I set it to a darker version. When you're doing line art, you want to add line variation, but find that you need to press really hard on your pen to get a difference in line variation. Well, to make it so that you don't have to kill your wrist, many programs have settings to change how much pressure you apply to the pen. By default, it looks like this, but if you make it more like this, you don't have to apply as much pressure to make the lines thicker. Also, if you use a drawing tablet like me, you can adjust the pressure settings in there. That's what I often do. This next hack is something I often use in my art. So for this, I'm going to repurpose this sketch I did of my OC Raylan. If you don't know Raylan, I'm not surprised because I haven't drawn her in ages, which is kind of sad because I do really enjoy drawing her. I call her my edgy sheep because she has sheep characteristics but doesn't really act like a sheep. So I made my drawing grayscale by using a hue correction layer, and right now I'm just adding some more contrast and values to make things more interesting. I wanted to add more darks and also add more lights so that there'd be a good amount of contrast. I also decided to make the eyes a bit more snazzy. Like I said, this was a quick sketch that I drew in my free time, but now that's for a video, I wanted to make it a little bit more fancy. Anyways, now for the fun part. This drawing is in grayscale, but I can color it in literally seconds by using gradient maps. Many programs have gradient maps. Basically, they take different colors and apply them depending on different values in your art, and you can have a lot of fun with these. You can make your own gradient maps, but right now I'm just scrolling through some of the ones I have by default, and as you can see, we can get very different feelings depending on which ones we choose. Also, I fixed this annoying empty spot in a little bit. I didn't notice it at first. I really liked this one. Raylan's hair is red, so it matches her color scheme really well. After I applied the gradient map, I did a bit of editing, like I added some bright red around some areas, upped the contrast, and also added a pop of blue to the eyes to draw our attention there. Like I said, I use gradient maps often in my art. A lot of times I use them to harmonize colors. I'll set the gradient map to a lower opacity and often set it to a blending mode like overlay. So yeah, I definitely recommend trying out gradient maps. They can be really fun. Well, those are all the hacks for this video. I had a lot of fun testing these out, and I also learned a few things along the way. It's always fun to learn new art-related things. Before we end, I want to say a big thank you to my wonderful patrons and YouTube members for their support. It means so much to me. And a big hello to my newest YouTube member, Rs3 Nick. Thank you so much for your support. And thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!